what happens when the world's longest undefended border suddenly gets a lot more defended? And what does it mean when a country known for welcoming immigrants with open arms starts closing those arms? This week, we're witnessing the most dramatic transformation in U.S.-Canada migration policy in decades. Changes so significant, they're reshaping the entire North American immigration landscape. Here in InfoExpress, I'm going to take you deep into the biggest migration story that mainstream media isn't fully covering. We're talking about an unprecedented 89% drop in illegal border crossings, Canada's most aggressive border security legislation in modern history, and policy shifts that could affect millions of people across North America. If you're planning to immigrate, already living as an immigrant, or simply care about how policy shapes our world, this video could change how you view the future of North American migration. Let's start with what I'm calling Canada's policy revolution, the Strong Borders Act introduced just 3 weeks ago. Now, if you think this is just another routine legislative update, think again. This act represents the most significant shift in Canadian border policy since 9/11. Minister Gary Anandasangari didn't mince words when he announced this legislation. He stated it will strengthen our laws and keep Canadians safe by giving law enforcement unprecedented tools to secure borders, combat organized crime, stop illegal fentanyl flow, and crack down on money laundering. But here's what makes this particularly fascinating and controversial. The timing of this act isn't coincidental. It comes as Canada faces mounting pressure from multiple directions. The ongoing opioid crisis, largely fueled by fentanyl crossing borders, increasing concerns about organized crime networks using migration routes, and significant political pressure both domestically and from the United States to tighten border security. Now let me share some numbers that will absolutely blow your mind, because these statistics tell a story that goes far beyond simple policy changes. They reveal a complete transformation in migration patterns. First, the headline number. Canada is reporting an 89% drop in illegal U.S. crossings by foreign nationals from June to December 2024. Let me put that in perspective for you. If 1,000 people were crossing illegally in June, by December, that number had dropped to just 110. That's not a reduction, that's practically elimination. But that's just the beginning. Simultaneously, we're seeing a 61% increase in refusals from high-risk countries. This means Canada isn't just stopping people at the border. They're being much more selective about who they even allow to attempt entry. The screening process has become significantly more rigorous. Here's another crucial statistic. Asylum claims by Canadian visa holders dropped 18% just between October and November 2024. That's a massive month-to-month decline that suggests people are either being deterred from making claims or finding their claims rejected at much higher rates. But what do these numbers actually mean for real people? Let's break it down. The 89% drop suggests that either Canada's deterrent measures are incredibly effective, or the traditional migration routes and methods are being disrupted in unprecedented ways. The increase in refusals indicates a policy shift toward much stricter interpretation of entry requirements. What's particularly striking is the speed of these changes. We're not talking about gradual shifts over years. These are dramatic transformations happening in months, sometimes weeks. This suggests a coordinated, systematic approach to border security that goes far beyond normal policy adjustments. But the story doesn't stop at who's being kept out. It extends to who's being let in, and this is where Canada's traditional identity as an immigration-friendly nation is being fundamentally challenged. Canada's new 2025 to 2027 Immigration Levels Plan reveals a clear and deliberate downward trajectory. 395,000 permanent residents in 2025, dropping to 380,000 in 2026, and further down to 365,000 in 2027. Now, these might sound like big numbers, but in the context of Canada's recent immigration history, this represents a significant pullback. To put this in perspective, Canada has been aggressively increasing immigration targets for years. The country has built its economic strategy around population growth through immigration, especially given its aging population and labor shortages. This reversal suggests that political and social pressures have overcome economic considerations. But here's what's really interesting about these numbers. They represent a fundamental shift in how Canada views immigration's role in its future. For decades, the narrative has been, we need more immigrants to sustain our economy and society. Now the narrative is shifting toward, we need to be more selective and strategic about immigration. This change affects multiple categories of immigrants: economic immigrants who form the backbone of Canada's skilled worker programs, family reunification cases, and refugee resettlement programs. Each category is seeing reductions, suggesting this isn't targeted at specific types of immigration, but represents a broad-based policy shift. The ripple effects of these changes extend far beyond simple numbers. Universities that have built international student recruitment strategies, employers relying on temporary foreign worker programs, and communities that have grown around newcomer settlement services are all having to recalibrate their expectations and plans. Meanwhile, the United States isn't sitting idle in this evolving landscape. Since June 9, 2025, new travel restrictions have been implemented under national security and public safety measures. Now, here's a crucial detail that many people are missing. Canadian citizens traveling on Canadian passports remain unaffected by these restrictions. This suggests a level of trust and cooperation between the two countries that goes beyond simple policy coordination. But what's really fascinating is the nature of US-Canada cooperation on migration issues. In February 2025, the White House issued a statement acknowledging that the Government of Canada has taken immediate steps designed to alleviate the illegal migration and illicit drug crisis through cooperative actions. This isn't typical diplomatic language. This is explicit recognition of coordinated policy efforts. What does this cooperation actually look like in practice? We're seeing enhanced information sharing between border agencies, coordinated enforcement operations, and what appears to be synchronized policy announcements. The timing of Canada's Strong Borders Act and the US travel restrictions isn't coincidental. These represent coordinated responses to shared challenges. This cooperation extends beyond simple border security. Both countries are dealing with similar pressures: the fentanyl crisis, concerns about organized crime networks, and domestic political pressure to demonstrate control over immigration. The traditional dynamic where the US was seen as the tough neighbor and Canada as the welcoming alternative is being replaced by a more coordinated approach. But this cooperation also raises important questions about sovereignty and independent policymaking. Critics argue that Canada's policy shifts are driven more by US pressure than by Canadian interests. Supporters counter that shared challenges require coordinated responses, and that effective border security benefits both countries. Now, beyond all the statistics and policy announcements, let's talk about what these changes mean for real people. Because policy is never just about numbers, it's about human lives and dreams. For prospective immigrants, the landscape has fundamentally changed. People who have been planning to immigrate to Canada based on previous policies and targets are finding themselves in a completely different reality. Immigration lawyers report significant increases in clients asking about timeline delays, changed requirements, and alternative pathways. The impact on families is particularly significant. Family reunification programs, which allow Canadian citizens and permanent residents to sponsor relatives, are experiencing longer processing times and stricter requirements. This means families are being separated for longer periods, and some reunification plans that seemed certain are now uncertain. International students represent another group facing major changes. While not directly affected by the permanent resident target reductions, the overall shift in Canada's immigration stance is creating uncertainty about post-graduation pathways to permanent residence. Many students chose Canada specifically because of clearer pathways to permanent residence compared to other countries. But the impacts extend beyond individual immigrants. Canadian employers who have built business models around accessing international talent are having to reconsider their strategies. Industries that have relied heavily on immigration, from technology to healthcare to agriculture, are facing potential labor shortages. Communities across Canada that have grown around newcomer settlement are also affected. Settlement agencies, language schools, and community organizations are having to adjust their capacity and programming based on reduced newcomer numbers. To fully understand what's happening between the US and Canada, we need to zoom out and look at the global context, because these changes aren't happening in isolation. Across the developed world, we're seeing what migration experts call a restrictionist turn. Countries that have traditionally been open to immigration, from Germany to Australia to the UK, are implementing tighter controls and reduced targets. Canada's policy shifts align with this global trend, suggesting shared challenges and similar political pressures. The rise of populist politics in many countries has made immigration a central political issue. Even in Canada, which has traditionally had broader political consensus on immigration benefits, we're seeing increased political debate about immigration levels and impacts. Economic factors also play a crucial role. Rising housing costs, healthcare system pressures, and concerns about job competition are influencing public opinion about immigration levels. Canada's policy adjustments reflect these domestic pressures while trying to maintain the economic benefits of immigration. Climate change is adding another layer of complexity. As climate-related displacement increases globally, traditional migration patterns are changing, and countries are having to prepare for new types of migration pressures. The geopolitical context is equally important. Tensions with certain countries, security concerns, and changing international relationships all influence migration policy. Canada's approach reflects not just bilateral US-Canada cooperation, but broader Western coordination on migration challenges. Now, let's dig deeper into what experts are saying about these changes, because the surface-level policy announcements only tell part of the story. Immigration lawyers I've spoken with describe this as the most significant policy environment shift they've seen in their careers. The speed and scope of changes are unprecedented, and they're having to completely recalibrate their advice to clients. Economists are divided on the implications. Some argue that reduced immigration targets could exacerbate labor shortages and slow economic growth, particularly given Canada's aging population. Others suggest that a more selective approach could actually improve economic outcomes by focusing on higher-skilled immigrants. Demographers warn that reduced immigration could accelerate population aging and create long-term economic challenges. Canada's birth rate is below replacement level, making immigration crucial for population maintenance. Security experts generally support the enhanced border measures, arguing that they're necessary responses to evolving threats. However, civil liberties advocates express concerns about expanded powers and potential impacts on legitimate asylum seekers. Political scientists note that these changes represent a significant shift in Canadian political consensus on immigration. The traditional multi-party support for high immigration levels is showing signs of strain, reflecting similar political dynamics seen in other Western democracies. These changes affect millions of people across North America and beyond, and this story is far from over. The policies we're discussing today will shape migration patterns, family reunifications, and economic development for years to come. I want to hear from you. What's your take on Canada's shift towards stricter border security? Are these measures a necessary response to legitimate challenges, or do they represent an abandonment of Canada's humanitarian traditions? If you're directly affected by these policies, share your experience in the comments. Your perspective helps others understand the real-world impact of these changes. And here's something crucial. If you want to stay ahead of these rapidly evolving policies, you need reliable, in-depth analysis. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because I post comprehensive weekly updates on North American migration news, policy analysis, and their real-world impacts. Unlike mainstream media that often covers these stories superficially, we dive deep into the implications and context you need to truly understand what's happening. Share this video with anyone who might be affected by these changes, whether they're planning to immigrate, already navigating the system, or simply trying to understand how policy shapes our world. The US-Canada border relationship is entering uncharted territory. With an 89% drop in illegal crossings, sweeping new security legislation, coordinated bilateral policies, and the most significant reduction in immigration targets in decades, we're witnessing a fundamental transformation in North American migration. This isn't just a policy story. It's a human story about changing opportunities, evolving security challenges, and the tension between openness and control in an increasingly complex world. Whether you're directly affected by these changes or simply interested in how policy shapes our societies, one thing is absolutely certain: this transformation is far from complete. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into one of the most important migration stories of our time. Here in InfoExpress, and I'll see you next week for another comprehensive look at the policies and changes shaping our world.